I am from the infrastructure program, where I have been the policy and regulatory advisor until recently. Now, within the ICT infrastructure program, our objective was defined as to ensure that all African countries are connected to one another by a broadband optical fiber network. And in turn, Africa is linked to the rest of the world through existing and planned submarine cable systems. And the development of this network that would connect the continent was approached in two parts. First, a network covering Eastern and Southern African countries, and another network for the rest of the continent. The work started in Eastern and Southern Africa, but before we talk about the work that happened in that region, the developmental objectives that were articulated by NEPAD was to reduce the cost of communication on the continent and have reliable and secure infrastructure. As an example, we like to give the disparity in the cost of communication, where in the developed world, you can get 2 megabits per second for between $10 and $20 a month, meaning that you can afford to have this in just about every home or in every room in every home. But in Africa, the average is still hovering around $5,000 per month. And if you think about it, not many small and medium enterprises can afford that cost. But even if they can afford it, when you think that their competitors in other regions of the world are paying much less, then you are at a big disadvantage. So it was identified that there is a need to develop a policy and regulatory framework under which such a continental network can be developed. And we got together a number of experts who came up with 5 policy principles that should guide the development of such a network. The first principle was the principle of open and non-discriminatory affordable access to these networks. And by open access, they meant that wherever this broadband is available in any country market, all the authorized service providers should access this broadband at the same terms. This is quite different from what happens largely at present, when 1 or 2 or 3 players have the capacity and they on-sell it to other licensed providers, mainly cellular providers, internet service providers, and so on, at very high margins. And the end user ends up paying prices that are much higher than other parts of the world. The second principle was equitable joint ownership of these backbones by entities from across the continent. The third was acceptance that special purpose vehicles, legal entities, should be created to develop these networks. And the fourth was a policy of public good, meaning that we should treat this type of infrastructure like we treat roads, so that this being a basic infrastructure, we don't want its use to be expensive. And finally, principle of public-private partnerships. The experts also recommended that these principles should apply equally to the submarine segment of the network as well as the terrestrial segment. And after very many stakeholder engagements and consultations, among 14 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa, 12 countries signed a protocol in Kigali, Rwanda, which we refer to as the Kigali Protocol. And the countries shown in red have since ratified this protocol, and the protocol is now in force, and we can use it to build this network. The countries that were unable to sign this protocol can now accede to the protocol since it is now in force. Now, in October 2007, the ministers from the countries that signed the protocol came together and agreed on a number of things. One was a submarine cable system going around encircling the African continent called UhuruNet, a terrestrial network connecting countries to their neighbors called UmojaNet, and they proposed a name for the submarine company, Baharicom. Uhuru, Umoja, and Bahari are Swahili words. Uhuru means independence or freedom. Umoja means togetherness, and Bahari means the ocean or seas. The ministers also requested the African Union Commission to work out modalities for allowing the countries that were out of Eastern and Southern Africa to be able to accede to this protocol. Now, if we look at the map of Africa, it shows the countries that have access to submarine cables, those that have limited access, and some that still don't have connectivity to the submarine cables. And the development of UhuruNet, as shown in the map, is a concept where this ring around the continent provides for connectivity for every coastal country in Africa, and they provide branching units in the ocean so that even if a country like Somalia is not stable enough for it to be connected, a branching unit will be left in the water so that at a future date the country can be connected. Now, developments on the submarine cable. Baharicom as a company was registered in 2009, and in October of that year it signed an MOU with the S Consortium, the Africa Coast to Europe, which is a submarine cable being spearheaded by France Telecom. It stretches 14,000 kilometers from France up to Cape Town in South Africa, connecting countries along the West African coast. The supply contract for this cable was signed on the 5th of June in Paris, and the cable should become operational in the middle of 2012. The difference between this submarine cable and other submarine cables that have been developed is that it adheres to the principles contained in the Kigali Protocol. In other words, this capacity will be provided to all authorized service providers wherever the cable lands. And by the way, by authorized service providers, it means not just the licensed providers, but any other service providers that the country or the regulator in the country may authorize. And the idea here was to allow research institutions to have direct access rather than having to go through other parties. And this is a schematic showing the landing stations on the S UhuruNet submarine cable. On the east and northern coast of Africa, discussions are ongoing between Baharicom and some of the developers on that coast, some of whom already have operating submarine cables like Seacom, Teams, and Easy, and Lion, which is still under development. It is believed that capacity may be obtained on these cables, and then it would become part of UhuruNet and be available at open access terms. So UhuruNet will be completed in different parts of the continent at different times, but when the ring is all in place, it should operate seamlessly. Now, coming to the terrestrial side of things, which were lagging behind the submarine cable development, a detailed feasibility study was undertaken from the end of 2008 and the middle of 2009 in Eastern and Southern Africa to look at all the broadband fiber infrastructure that is in place, the gaps between existing and what is required, plans that are in place to close those gaps. And at the end of that study, the consultants came up with two options. One was to build an entirely new network, and the other option was to maximize the lease of our existing infrastructure. And the costs for the two options are shown. And the consultants then recommended to maximize the lease as a cheaper and quicker way of getting the Umojanet network up and running. The consultants also found that of the nearly 30,000 kilometers required to link up the 21 countries on the mainland in Eastern and Southern Africa, 60% was already in place and operational, 8% was under construction, 23% planned to be completed by 2012, and that only 9% was required new build. And it is believed that these figures are typical of what pertains in other parts of the continent. On the basis of this information, we tried to look at scenarios of how such an infrastructure could begin to be established in Southern Africa region. We considered 4 of the countries that have signed and ratified the Kigali Protocol, South Africa, Lesotho, Botswana, and Zimbabwe. And we found that the network is a star network and would not be very reliable in terms of if any of those links is cut, the city at the end is cut off. So it was realized that it is important to get in the countries of Namibia, Zambia, and Mozambique to begin to have a mesh network as a starting point. And on the basis of this information, we were able to attract a group of African investors who formed a company called Umojanet as the special purpose vehicle that will develop and implement this network. Umojanet, as the special purpose vehicle, has a provision to accept investment from all African countries. And the big idea being, first, to approach those entities that already own infrastructure that should become part of this network and offer them an option of either bringing in that infrastructure as part of their investment, or lease that infrastructure, or buy the infrastructure so that it is part of Umojanet, and then look for other interested investors in this network. Umojanet Corporation has identified France Telecom Orange Group as a strategic or technical partner in the rolling out of the network. Umojanet has completed a business plan covering 10 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa and 12 countries in West and Central Africa to be covered in the 2 years, 2011 and 2012. But Umojanet is currently looking for investment to be able to begin rolling out this network at the beginning of next year. And I think that is my short story. My contacts are there if you should require more information about these networks or about other programs that the NEPAD E-Africa Commission is planning to begin taking to the rest of the continent. I thank you.